for everyone for coming today, and welcome to the 2021 Inaugural Drive Electric Virginia Forum. My name is John. I'm a program coordinator at Virginia Clean Cities and an organizer for the event. I just want to quickly go over the Q&A and how that's going to flow before I hand it over to Alan Harned, the speaker and moderator for the event. There's 4 Q&A sessions, and you can ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on the right next to the chat function. So you click those 3 dots and then you open up the Q&A. You're free to ask questions. We encourage you to ask questions all throughout the webinar or all throughout the forum while someone's presenting, and then in that panel session, we'll pull questions out and give them to the speakers. And if your question isn't answered in that panel, the speakers have the ability to go in and answer them manually through the Q&A function. Just want to let everyone know also that this is recorded, and we'll put the slide deck up on the Virginia Clean Cities website soon after the event. So if you miss anything, during this webinar, then you can go back and check it out. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Alan Harned, again, Executive Director for Virginia Clean Cities.
Thank you very much, John, and I really appreciate all the hard work from the whole Virginia Clean Cities team and the Drive Electric Virginia team, all the folks who have been pushing to see this kick off and also start up some of our working group efforts. Thank you all very much. I do hope that we can get a chance to introduce ourselves as well. And so we'll have some chat features here today that folks can use, as well as some questions. And so I do see some people testing out the chat, but if you could put in the chat your name, where you're from, and feel free to start a dialogue sharing something about your interest in electric vehicles, transportation electrification, or an anecdote. And later on, we'll be inviting folks to drop in their LinkedIn profiles in case folks want to connect afterwards on this, or contact information. And so next slide. I'm just going to go over the agenda. This is what you guys all saw as you were registering, but I do want to flag that we're going to have a couple spots for a few questions and answers, as well as a final question and answer session around the close. And just to reiterate what John said about just using that Q&A function as well as the chat function. We're going to start off with just a brief introduction to the project and the community that we are hoping to build for a Virginia Drive Electric program. We are going to hear from one of Central Virginia's marquee Drive Electric chapter, hearing from Charles Jarina from his phenomenal work. We will have a pause for some questions and answers, and then we'll go into a dealership discussion. In order to move electric vehicles on the road, we're going to have to be able to purchase them. And so we are joined today with Lisa, with Carter Myers, and also with Cameron, with the National Auto Dealers Association. We will pause again for another Q&A session then, so you'll be able to ask each of these subsets some questions. It's very important to us at Virginia Clean Cities and to many of the stakeholders. We are continually hearing about the value, the shared value, and the importance of having electric vehicles be accessible to all people, for all Virginians, every corner of Virginians, rural, folks who have been from disadvantaged or underserved communities. And so we're going to get a chance to hear from 3 key speakers in this area, Andrew with Blink, Eric with Forth, and Danielle with EV Noir. And also we're going to hear about utilities and the landscape for EV charging from the utility perspective. And we're joined fantastically by Joyce with Rappahannock Electric and Kate Staples with Dominion Energy. So we've got a really great program today, and then several chances to have dialogue. If you can't get your question answered, or if we run out of time, please drop it in the chat or share something, we can get back to you. And this is the first of these. We're planning to do these larger evening events annually, but we could do different formats and other items. We will also have a follow-up to check in on that. And so next slide. I just want to say how much I appreciate the team on the VCC side that's been pushing for this. Virginia Clean Cities is here in Harrisonburg with several staff. Myself, Matt Wade, Sarah Stahlcup, John and Liam are here in Harrisonburg. We're also joined in our Charlottesville and Roanoke's office with Bruce and with Amy. So I do want to thank and call out the staff who are really pushing all sorts of clean fuels programs with a heavy focus on this Drive Electric Virginia project. And so next slide, we are part of as far as we could reach, national cohort, and we are seeking to expand this Drive Electric effort. This was led by Tennessee, but we're dropping in with a Drive Electric Virginia consolidated effort here. It's part of a 14-state current initiative to accelerate electrification, identify and address challenges, and to share best practices across states to sort of hand deliver solutions so that folks can keep moving forward. We have 7 project areas, so statewide electric vehicle programs, consumer education and chapter development, utility and regulator engagement, electric vehicle charging infrastructure planning, state and local government official education and support, dealer engagement, and fleet engagement for EV adoptions. And so this project was formed from a lot of the good work of stakeholders and leaders in the Commonwealth of Virginia, suggesting down to other states what can happen. So we're taking the best that we know and sharing it. We're also rebuilding and working to be sure that Virginia is uplifted by some of the good work that's happening in these other states. It's a 3-year project, and the program launched in July of 2021. Next slide. Just a quick note about the progress. We do see continual progress in vehicle registrations. We have an active vehicle dashboard at Drive Electric Virginia that has portions of this data, but battery electric vehicles continue to grow. And we do think that's going to follow some of the larger scale trends that we've seen with hybrid vehicles, which were released in the 1990s. And so this is just a couple charts of the growth in the continued growth in clean fuel vehicles in Virginia. Battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles operate on a, you guys probably are all tracking this at this point, but the battery electric vehicles operate on an entirely electric powertrain where you plug in and recharge the vehicles. Plug-in hybrids operate with a gasoline backup, and hybrid vehicles are gasoline vehicles that came years ago. They're fuel efficient, and we're hoping to follow that trend in Virginia with the increased growth to the hundreds of thousands and even millions of electric vehicles. Next slide. And we're getting there. So we do have a color-coded map on the Drive Electric Virginia website now in the resources section, but we just wanted to identify exactly how many vehicles were registered in cities and counties in a little bit easier to view, just number mode. This is just a quick glance, but it's just an example of some of these resources, and we will be dropping some of these into the chat. But the note is that electric vehicles are growing and are accessible to Virginians in every single city and county. We've got a lot of electric vehicles in Virginia, and we've got many more vehicles to come. Next slide. And on charging infrastructure, we have thousands of chargers. We're seeking to grow access to electric vehicle charging ports, etc. But they are in many corners of the Commonwealth, although there are some areas that also still need greater access and service. We're talking about 1,699 public level 2 charging plug locations and charging plugs, and 556 DC fast charging plugs. So we've got a lot of good things going on. Next slide. And where we are going with that, if we reach 10% of Virginia's vehicles to be electrified, we may need a whole lot more. We may need 91,000 workplace charging plugs, about 60,000 level 2 charging plugs, and 6,500 DC fast charging plugs if you're using the NREL's EVI Pro tool in order to project the infrastructure needed for Virginia, which would be about 250,000 home chargers as well. And so next slide. We have launched driveelectricvirginia.org. It's still in its early stages, but it already provides some wealth of resources for EV owners and EV curious, for the governments, for fleets, for dealerships, and for utilities. We have a EV dashboard, which provides a rich amount of information and tools, including infrastructure and equity tools, electric vehicle registration statistics in partnership with EV Atlas, state and local charging reports, and so some map predictions down to most of the urbanized areas in Virginia, a charging station locator, and then all sorts of additional resources are coming with this project, such as EV education and providing support to EV chapters and Drive Electric news and events. And so speaking of Drive Electric chapters, I do want to pass it over to our next speaker, our first speaker and lead organizer of Drive Electric RVA. Charles?
Thanks, Alan, for the introduction. Next slide. So my name is Charles, and so who am I? I bought my first electric vehicle in 2014. That's the one on the left. And it's a Nissan Leaf, and my second one this past March. It's a Chevy Bolt on the right. I was initially motivated by high gas prices and a desire to reduce my carbon footprint, but ended up loving the quiet ride, the low maintenance, and the instant torque. Next slide. In the 7 years in between, I founded Drive Electric RVA. Our growing community of electric vehicle owners and enthusiasts in Richmond promotes EVs as a fun, practical transportation alternative that also helps address air pollution and climate change. Next slide. So for the next 10 minutes or so, I will share my lessons learned promoting electric vehicles at the grassroots level in Richmond and other parts of the state. Next slide. If you want to skip ahead, here they are. Know your audience, be professional, think big, and small is good too, and build community. Next slide. So I'll start with the first one, know your audience. Focus on the people who are open to your communications. And you can sort of break that down into the EV enthusiast and the EV curious, which Alan mentioned. The EV enthusiast is the person who is this close to getting an electric vehicle, and for various reasons, they're not quite there yet, but they know a lot about it and gather as much information as they can. And the EV curious are people who are open to it. They have heard about EVs. They're not necessarily thinking about getting one, but they definitely have heard about it, and they have positive things about it and are open to knowing more about it. So if you get those people, those are definitely the ones that are very, very open to various kinds of communication. Next slide. Then you have the EV agnostic, those who could care less one way or the other about electric vehicles, and what I call the EV hostile. So the moment you approach them at an event, they say, talk to the hand. With these groups, the best you can do is to be friendly and ask lots of questions to learn more about their point of view, where they're coming from, and that can kind of help you in other communications. But don't expect to be able to change that person's mind in that few-minute interaction. But it's still worth having that basic, just friendly kind of question and answer with them. Next slide. Don't forget the EV owner too. That's also an audience group, and that person should not just be cheered because they decided to go electric. They should be supported when advice is needed, no matter how basic the question is. And so these are people, even if you're, I was in that category. I had a Nissan Leaf for 7 years, but when I switched cars to a Bolt, I was sort of starting from scratch in a lot of ways. And so having people to reach out to in our group and on Facebook and on online bulletin boards is a great way to build that sense of connection community, which I'll get to later on. Next slide. So the next point I'll make is about being professional. When I started paying attention to how other people set up their spaces at farmers markets, community fairs, trade shows, I quickly realized that I needed to step up my game in order to be taken seriously. And here's a quick shot of kind of the first year that we were doing events. So you could see Chevy Bolt in the corner, right corner there. And basically I just had a table and a box with some stuff in it, and then had some other magazine kind of laid out, and a couple of signs and a chair. And that was basically it, which served the purpose. But in terms of that level of professionalism, in terms of being taken seriously at those kinds of events where there's other folks that are there, we weren't quite making the mark. So next slide. That means no table without a tablecloth. You need to have something that identifies who you are. So one of the first things we got was a little table sign that you see to my left and behind the table. Table runner is great because it's a little bit bigger, and that'll catch people's attention. Feather flags are great because you can position those, as you see on the right, so that grab people that are just walking by to the place. But more importantly than grabbing attention, again, it helps create a brand. That you're not just a bunch of people with cars that's associated with some kind of organization. Next slide. And a part of being professional, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to break the bank. Even something as simple as postcards or a business card that you can have on your table or can give out to people. So when you meet somebody somewhere, even if it's at the grocery store or wherever, that you have a card to give them, then I think that leaves a positive impression and indicates that you're sort of at the next level. Again, not just some guy with an electric car that is part of an organization. Next slide. That leads to my next point about thinking big. Based on the statistics we've compiled for our events the last few years, the average number of interactions we have is about 10 to 12 per hour, which, depending on your perspective, without any context, may not seem like a particularly meaningful number. That's actually not a whole lot. So you think about the average 3-hour event, that's about a dozen or so people. And because it really takes a while to communicate the information about electric vehicles. You don't want to oversimplify and just to get it done quickly. You want to make time to answer questions. So, the higher the volume of foot traffic you have at an event, the better. Because that way you actually maximize your impact because it takes a while for each interaction to occur. So, co-locate your activities with something else that draws a crowd, like a busy farmer's market or a holiday parade like you see in the picture here. Next slide. So we've had electric vehicles, all kinds of public events, and there's pictures of a few of them, from the Virginia International Auto Show to the Richmond Home Show, from inside a shopping mall during a back-to-school event. That was my leaf. They were parked in the middle. That was a very interesting way of getting my car inside of a mall. To the outside a music concert, just surrounded with people that were just curious to kind of stop by and check out the car. Next slide. But I also don't want you to forget that you can have an impact on a much smaller scale too. Every month we bring a couple of electric vehicles to a local farmer's market. And that's been a great way to meet new EV owners and connect with people. And you can see these are pictures from, the first picture is actually from one of our very first EV owners. And Patty actually was the one who came up with this idea for doing the farmer's market. And then the one that arrives more current event, recent event we went to from a farmer's market. Next slide. And we also started having a monthly cars and coffee type meet just for electric vehicle owners. Last month, we did a trunk or treat since it just happened that the car meet fell on Halloween. So we invited car owners to dress up their cars and give out candy. And so in just a few hours, we ended up interacting with about 50 grown-ups and their kids. And then some of the kids actually knew more. They were excited to see electric cars and get, in addition to getting the candy too. So big and small, it's good to have sort of a mix of events to connect with people. And that leads to my last point. Next slide, about building community. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this last one because it's the most important one. And so this includes connecting with your local businesses and nonprofit organizations whose interests intersect with your own. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who's like sells electric cars or sells electric charging. They could be somebody who's interested in technology, or maybe it's an electrician, or maybe it's an auto body dealer shop, auto body shop that just happens to specialize in fixing Teslas. The partnerships with these kinds of organizations help increase your reach and your impact. Next slide. In our case, each partnership has helped further our mission. I'll just give you 3 examples. Virginia Clean Cities helped us fund our EV Experience educational exhibit, which is currently under development. Solar United Neighbors has sponsored several of our events, as well as expand its solar co-op program to include electric vehicle charging, which was a great plus for us in terms of the EV adoption in general in the state. The Virginia Sierra Club helped us reach out to state lawmakers to attend an educational display of EVs that we have in front of the state capitol every January. So being able to tap into their contact list was huge, as well as taking advantage of their media savvy. Next slide. In addition to those partnerships, building community also means creating space for everyone to feel welcome and included. Next slide. EV owners aren't just climate change warriors or car nuts. They aren't just the people who like to be on the cutting edge or want to save money on fueling and maintenance. They're all the above. It cuts across different political points of view, male and female, what have you. And so being able to create that space where everyone kind of feels like they can participate is really important. Next slide. This last task is something that I've been working really hard on improving. It's easy to fall into the trap of just doing what you do by yourself and bring everyone else along while you're doing it. It's easy to just write people off, because they didn't vote for the same person you did. So, but again, we can't right at this stage of EV adoption where we're going from sort of initial early adopters to trying to find broader markets for electric vehicles. We can't afford to leave everybody behind. Next slide. So my final message to you is this: you can't do it alone. We need everyone at the table to advocate for electric vehicles. Thanks for the time, and the email address is there in case you have any questions. I'm always happy to share any more details on anything that I've said, as well as any of the materials that we developed to help us along.
Thank you very much, Charles, and please stick around. I am going to shortchange folks and remind everybody to use the question feature. We don't have any questions asked yet, so we're going to jump right into the next session where we're going to hear more about dealers. But Charles, please stick around because folks will probably have questions for you as we roll forward. And that was an excellent section, and I think that'll be a huge help as we build these chapters in Virginia and nationwide. Charles actually is recognized nationwide for his phenomenal work with National Drive Electric Week and just great events. And I say Charles, but I mean the whole Drive Electric RVA team. I want to step into dealer discussions, starting with Liza Borges, President and CEO of Carter Myers Group. Liza?
Hi, Liza. I think you might be on mute still.
Thank you. You'd think after a year and a half, we've learned how to hit the unmute button. John, thanks so much. As was said, I'm Liza Borges, and I'm the president and CEO of Carter Myers Automotive. And on the slide, it shows we represent 18 different new vehicle franchises and brands in Virginia, and now a few in West Virginia. And the reason I'm here tonight, a quick little background, a handful of years ago, my husband and I made a decision. Being in the automotive industry and recognizing that transportation is the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, we felt we had three choices. First, we could either put our head in the sand, keep selling as many internal combustion engine vehicles as we could, because that's what our customers were asking for, and maybe many years down the road having to explain ourselves to our children and our grandchildren. Number two, we could sell our business, get out of the industry and not be a part of it. Or three, we could be a part of the solution from the inside. We decided to stay inside, pull a seat to the table, and be a leader on the dealer side on how we can be a part of the transition to an EV future. We both started driving EVs. We have a Nissan Leaf, a Chevy Bolt, and now a Volvo XC90 plug-in hybrid, so that occasionally we can go a little bit further. We decided also to go solar on our dealerships and focus on renewable energy and how we could better impact or less impact the environment. We were the first dealership in the state of Virginia to be fully powered by the sun at our Nissan dealership in Charlottesville, and since then have gone solar on another 3 dealerships in our group, with more coming this year. In addition, I joined a couple of the national product committees, Volvo and Nissan in particular, because at the time they seemed to be leading the way in a strong commitment to EVs, and I wanted to be involved in giving feedback from the inside as to the direction of the future EV product. And then finally, last year, I worked very closely with the Virginia Auto Dealers Association to collaborate with several of the environmental groups and our legislators to pass the Clean Cars Act, to support the infrastructure study and the consumer EV rebate bill that was passed. And finally, just recently, I joined the Plug in America board to bring the voice of the dealer to the discussion so that we can be a partner in bringing solutions to the mass market of where EVs need to be going. So I know that franchise new car dealerships are an important part of the equation. So many of you all, as Charles was just sharing, have been kind of one-man shows working diligently to put more EVs on the road. But I know in the future, franchise new car dealerships have to be a part of this equation. Many of the current EV owners, first adopters, and passionate consumers are proactive in their own education, creating their creative in their financing if it's needed, and willing to put up with a less than perfect experience when purchasing an EV. The way that we as dealers can best serve this mission, if you want to go on to the next slide, is to create an experience that is easier, more efficient, and accessible to the mass market. There are many historical roadblocks in the EV journey that we are able to remove as franchise dealers, and our customers are going to have more unique questions and opportunities around their transportation choices in the next 10 years than ever before. And dealerships are, I believe, are a critical partner in helping consumers make the right choices for their families, for their communities, and for our environment. And I got to tell you, so far this year, somebody is doing something right. You may know these numbers, but during the third quarter of 2021, the overall new vehicle market all new cars, dropped by 13% from the previous period in 2020, according to Cox Automotive. But sales of EVs, hybrids, and plug-in hybrids jumped by more than 60%. So all told, EVs accounted for over 10% of the vehicles sold last quarter in the US, which was an all-time high. I want to talk about a couple of roadblocks where I think that we can make a difference. As dealerships, we are excited to make a difference and be a part of this change. Next slide, please. There are some key roadblocks. First, historically, dealerships were not equipped to answer questions for consumers around how an electric vehicle can fit into their life. We knew our product and we could answer the questions that we trained on from our manufacturer partners. But the questions around home charging infrastructure, how that increases your home electric bill, what to do if you run out on the side of the road, future service needs, battery questions, we were not equipped. Thankfully, we now have resources available to give sales associates confidence when working with EV customers. And Cameron is going to share a lot more about that in just a few moments. More importantly, with confidence, we now have sales associates excited to proactively talk to consumers about what an EV life can look like. Consumers should not have to go to multiple resources to find the right EV and learn how to make it fit their lifestyle needs. A couple other unique ways that dealerships can help on the education side is by creating real-life opportunities and experiences in EVs for consumers. So, for example, last year, we put a half a dozen Nissan Leafs into service loaner status so that as every Nissan service customer came into our service department, we were able to offer them or sometimes just put them in an electric vehicle to drive for the day. When we did that, we knew it was a win-win. The data shows that if a consumer has taken a ride, not even driven, an EV, they're 3 times more likely to consider buying one as someone who hasn't. A couple other partnerships that we've done that have been successful. We gave a Nissan Leaf to the Community Climate Collaborative here in Charlottesville, and they were able to take that Nissan Leaf out and give it to different community leaders, nonprofit leaders, business owners, just to get it into the hands of people who could then share their experience and hopefully soon buy an EV themselves. Dealerships are starting to be more and more involved in all of the different events that you all have already been doing, which is Ride and Drives, Drive Electric Week, and so many other opportunities. We are also looking and have already started partnering with local fleets and municipalities in the 6 different markets where we do business to encourage EV transitions, because we've seen if employees experience an EV at work, they will very likely consider one again for their personal vehicle. Second roadblock that I'd love to talk about tonight is how dealerships can assist consumers with different options around everything from their trade-in to financing. The majority of trade-ins on electric vehicles will not be an electric vehicle. Dealerships are certainly best sourced to be able to take in a variety of vehicles and be able to help transition a customer over from a financial perspective. We have a variety of lenders that we can now offer for different income and credit scores. We have options around leasing, with some consumers nervous about the future resale value of EVs, which I'll talk about in just a second. As I mentioned that resale, it's not a topic that comes up often and not a roadblock that I think we have to address today. But when we look at what's going on with EVs in today's market, they are depreciating faster than internal combustion engine vehicles. It's due to the technology changing so quickly and some of the fear of the consumer and the lender about what the lifetime needs of these vehicles are going to be. Those of us in the business don't have those same fears, but it does affect resale and residual values of some of the EVs on the road. However, in the future, that's going to flip. As EVs have a larger market share, we're actually going to have the opposite concern, where we're going to start seeing the resale value and residuals of internal combustion engine vehicles decline, and we're going to make some solutions to make sure that customers do have equity to be able to trade into that EV. And dealerships can certainly make that a smoother transition. Roadblock number 3 is around financing options. Dealers need to embrace, and some solutions that we're bringing to the table, give us the ability to give a consumer 1 monthly payment that could include their home charger. It could include specific extended service contracts for batteries or other EV components, as well as potentially options around how do we offer a monthly commercial charging card so that ultimately a consumer has 1 monthly payment, as well. And one thing I didn't mention around that home charging infrastructure, having local electricians that dealerships work with so that the day a customer takes delivery of their vehicle, we know what charging system is going to be included and have an electrician out at their house to install. We need to make this easy for consumers and make it a one-stop shop and take some of the fear off all the different components that they need to take into account when buying their first EV. Roadblock number 4 that I'll mention, dealers need to be a partner with our legislators. We have to ensure that the dollars that are spent to encourage adoption of EVs is being spent efficiently. We are the boots on the ground, and we connect with customers daily. This past year, we were able to work together in the state of Virginia to pass the Clean Roads Act, the infrastructure study, and as I mentioned, the consumer rebate bill. Unfortunately, the rebate bill was not funded. And as a voice for the consumer, we strongly believe that this rebate is needed to close the gap on the purchase price of an EV versus a comparable internal combustion engine unit. Again, the consumers who are the next chapter in this major shift in our economy, they are payment buyers, with over 80% of the consumers financing their vehicle out of need. And an additional $30 per month can shift a decision away from an EV still at this point. And the bill that was passed last year focuses on these mainstream customers. It focuses on customers who were purchasing an EV under $50,000 and consumers with an income under a certain limit. So this was the mass market of consumers out there today that we need to shift towards an EV focus. As the market shifts, dealers need to be a partner in helping our legislators then determine how we can get the older internal combustion engine vehicles off the road. This is going to be an important part of the shift. And down the road, when we have enough EV options and different price points and different size vehicles, our focus will turn to removing the ICE vehicles off the road. The last roadblock that I wanted to touch on tonight in this short period of time is around access to service. Many of the early EV buyers have not had local and timely access to service. As we move EVs into the mass market of consumers, dealerships play a critical role in serving customers' needs to keep their vehicles reliable and safely on the road. When the first EVs were more an extra car, having local available service was not as necessary, but I know when it's your only car, it's critical. Also, there have already been startup EV companies that haven't made it, and dealers are here to be able to continue to service vehicles that may not have OEM support in the future. Dealerships right now today are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in new tools, equipment, and training to be able to serve our current and future EV customers. For example, we have a very small Cadillac dealership here in Charlottesville, and we are investing over $200,000 this year for lifts that are able to hold the weight of the battery in the event of service or replacement, special tools to access the EV components, charging stations around our campus for both customer use, inventory use, and our service vehicles. And one other thing along the lines of service that I would love for everybody to keep in mind, a critical role that we play as dealers is to invest and support in the local technical schools in growing the future technicians who will be able to work on these vehicles. Most technical schools today are not well funded. They work on older, most 15-year-old vehicles, high mileage units that obviously are all internal combustion engines. And we're not attracting enough future technicians who see automotive as a viable career path. However, EVs are the perfect opportunity for us to change this picture, attract a new group of technicians to our industry. So we are excited to be a part of this journey. We are here to remove any roadblocks that may be in the way as we look towards our EV future. And I thank you all for letting me be here tonight.
Phenomenal. And we're going to keep rolling right ahead into Cameron Wilson. And Cameron, if I could try to aim for 8 minutes, if that is all right.
You got it.
Let's roll.
I'll go fast. So Liza, thank you so much. That was wonderful information. And I just want to talk a little bit about the national number of dealers in the United States so you can all understand how big of a role that dealerships can play in the EV future. There are over 16,500 dealership locations in the United States and over 18,500 franchises in the US. So think of all of those. Once all of those dealers start getting EVs onto their showroom floors, they are going to be promoting them and you know, they will be the best EV advocates out there because in my opinion, dealers are truly one of the last true entrepreneurs out there, and their whole purpose is supporting their communities that they are in. And you know, I have to give a big shout out to Liza for the fact that, you know, I consider her lucky in the fact that she's had Nissans and the Chevy Bolts and now the Volvos that she can focus on selling. A lot of our franchise dealers don't have that opportunity yet. Their franchise may not have an EV yet. They're coming, and we can't wait for all of our franchise dealers to have EVs to sell. And then I just want to say a quick couple stats about Virginia. In Virginia, there are 452 new car dealerships and over 31,000 people employed in those dealerships in the state of Virginia. So just think about how many more EV advocates you'll have when every single one of those dealership employees has had a chance to sit in an EV and drive an EV. And from a dealership perspective, in 2020, the dealerships in Virginia supported the state with $956 million in state sales tax paid to the state. So think of how important that is for every one of the dealerships in Virginia supporting the state of Virginia. So now I'll launch right into what NADA is working on from an educational standpoint. The first is a partnership that we're working on with the National Fire Protection Association. They received a grant from the Department of Energy, and they're developing an EV course to help with EV adoption. And that course will be focused not only on dealerships, but also on people like first responders and code enforcement and things like that all throughout the United States, so they have a better understanding of the safety of electric vehicles. We've seen, I know you all have seen a lot of misinformation out there about unfortunately EV fires, but when speaking to the National Fire Protection Association, they have said that ice fires are so common that they never even make the news. And on average, I believe the statistic is there's an ice fire about once every 3 minutes in the United States. So the National Fire Protection Association is excited about electric vehicles and their safety and how much safer they will be from a fire standpoint. We're also working with the Center for Sustainable Energy on some additional EV courses for our dealership employees, along with, as Liza mentioned, she is on the board with Plugstar and all the great training that they have available for dealerships already. We also at NADA launched an electric vehicle webinar series back in May, and on the next slide, I'll show you some of the great webinars we've already done for our dealers. I've also got some slides on our upcoming NADA show in March of 2022, which is the automotive event of the year where all of the dealerships come in, all of the dealer employees and dealer owners come in to learn the latest and greatest about what's going on in the industry. And then the last item that we have on this slide is our driven management guide. And this is available for all of our dealers. It's also available to any of you if you'd like to go to our website and download that guide. This is the latest EV information that we have compiled and have made available to all new franchise new car dealers in the United States. Next slide. As I mentioned, our webinar series launched back in May. And you can see the ones that we've already done. We've recorded and put them on our website. These are accessible to our dealers 24/7. And so we're really trying to get the information out there as soon as we can to the dealers to keep them abreast of the latest information on EVs. So you can see the list there. We actually had 2 EV webinars this week. We had one that was going through the details of that driven guide that I mentioned. The first one there, the EV driven guide highlights and opportunities. And then today we had one on the EV battery lifecycle management. So lots more to come with our webinar series. Next slide. And so, as I mentioned, our show coming up in March, this will be the first time at our show that we're really focusing on electric vehicles and providing as much information as we can to all of our dealership members out there. And I've got a couple slides to show you what we're planning on doing. Next slide. So first, we'll have a little history and the future of EVs. And just so you all know, this will be at our event out in Las Vegas. And there's typically, I think, close to 20,000, I believe, people that attend our show, our annual show. And so they'll have an opportunity to go through the history and the future of EVs, the EV technology for dealerships, and dealer highlights, highlighting dealers like Liza that are already ahead of the game with EV sales at their dealership. And next slide. So you can see this first will be the history and the future of EVs, just a mock-up of what it'll look like in the convention center. And then the next slide is the one that I think is the more important part of it. Next slide, please. We'll be hosting an area of EV experts. And so we'll invite not only our internal subject matter experts that are employed by NADA, but we'll also be inviting subject matter experts from organizations like Plug in America, from Center for Sustainable Energy, all of the organizations out there that have really knowledgeable subject matter experts to really come and help answer dealer questions, so that when they're back in their stores, they can really help educate the consumers. So just a quick little picture of what that's going to look like at our show. And then the next slide, please. Oh, I guess we had some extra little graphics there. All the great things that we'll have going on. And at all of those little booths that you saw in that diagram, as I mentioned, we'll have our internal staff with EV expertise, and we'll also have our outside consultants, as I mentioned, from places like ChargeWay, Plug in America, everybody that's already, very well educated and can really help answer dealer questions while they're there. And I think I noticed it looked like Ralston King from Virginia Auto Dealers Association is on the line today. And I just wanted to say, hey, thanks for joining us.
Well, Cameron and Liza, thank you very much, but please stick around. We've got a couple questions that are coming in. And I'm very excited about that booth work, and the Virginia auto shows will be able to benefit from learning about what NADA is doing. The used market can make electric vehicles also accessible to a range of folks, and I'm wondering how you are seeing dealers supporting working with used or trade-in vehicles to make EVs more accessible to Virginia.
Alan, I'd be happy to give a quick answer to that question. I think as you all move into the topic of affordability, we were discussing this around the legislation last year, and there were some questions about how we make them more affordable. I said the number one way we can make EVs more affordable is to get more new ones on the road, so that we have a life cycle of trade-ins that are then at the right price point for consumers who have a more limited budget. Dealers are, I will say right now, we're in a unique inventory situation, but we are absolutely stocking and bringing more used EVs in through auction purchases and also through trade-ins that are now out there for resale. In case anyone doesn't know, we are in a very tight inventory crunch on both the new car side and even on the used car side right now. So the inventory you're seeing is not quite the norm. But the used EVs are a prime way that we're going to continue to make them more affordable. And I would encourage you to check out your local dealers, because it is becoming more normal to see those in stock.
And I'm waiting for a few more questions to come in, but I will just vibe back to what you were saying about the electric vehicle incentive. I recognize that was a major priority of so many groups last year. And the way that the Virginia budget works is the governor can put it in his budget, or the General Assembly can put it in their budget. I just saw a note about $13 billion surplus in the budget this year from some of the kind of financial ups and downs. Wondering if you guys have thoughts on that, on getting that thing budgeted, or if anybody in the audience has any thoughts.
Well, I know, Alan, just from our seat, we are absolutely committed to doing work to make sure that we can get that funded this year. There are quite a few groups collaborating right now on the proper approach to make sure that we get it funded. There were a lot of questions from legislators on making sure that this was going to be incremental to the EVs on the road, and not just creating a rebate for buyers who didn't necessarily need it and who were going to buy an EV anyway. So there's been some great conversation behind the scenes on how we can maybe even potentially amend some things to make sure that that bill does get funded, and it is specifically intended for those who are looking to purchase lower priced EVs and those who have an income level under a certain amount. So I look forward to a lot of the groups collaborating this year and getting that rebate bill funded.
And I remember from some of the working groups that were preparing that, there was so much value that comes to the Commonwealth for every electric vehicle, in terms of economic opportunity, in terms of fuel savings, in terms of air quality and human health. So there's a whole lot of positive that a lot of people are pushing behind. Any input into this chip shortage and how it's affecting inventory? And I assume if there's any comments about the quality of new EVs or the delay in like software updates or fancy touchscreens, and if there is any idea when that might get back to normal.
So I think our chief economist is thinking that inventory levels will start to slowly increase in the first quarter, but we're not projecting inventory levels to get back to normal until the end of 2023 because of the chip shortage.
Alan, we're not seeing, I would say, anything that's very specific to just EVs. It's all inventory in general. And when we look at our future order bank, and we are taking orders for vehicles right now, most normally for the next 90 days, but we do have some specific models that we have over a year waiting list on. And we do have a significant number of orders proportionately, percentage-wise, for our incoming EVs, which is very exciting to see.
That is very exciting. And I do want to thank the panel and hope you guys can stick around or respond if there's some email questions that come in. But I do want to jump right into our dialogue on underserved communities, starting with Andrew Hillman. I started the day with the early morning meeting with Andrew, and so want to continue to pass the microphone to Mr. Hillman. Andrew.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Alan. It's an honor to be here today, and Blink, we're really excited about the future of EV charging. So as you can see, I segue right into my presentation there. So, but wonderful to hear the dealer discussion. We're very excited to see the support that the groups are starting to put into this now, and we very much be interested in working with NADA and the other dealer groups to help perpetuate that. Next slide, please. So my name is Andrew Hillman. I'm an executive sales manager with Blink Charging. The way we're segmented across the country, I'm responsible for the state of Virginia. I call the state of Virginia my home. And I've been, as it says here on the slide, very fortunate to combine my passion for advanced technology and my technical aptitude with a successful career in sales and management. So I've taken my my love for everything technical and combined it with my love for cars. And so I'm very happy to be working with Blink and working with everyone at Virginia Clean Cities. Next slide, please. So I put this slide in, and this is not going to be a surprise to anyone, but as you can see here, you know, the growth in EVs and the switch from ICE vehicles to electric is really inevitable. And we're starting to see a real swing in the adoption rate. I think that will be accelerated even further next year when vehicles like the F-150 Lightning start to come out. This will be the first really mainstream electric truck. I know Rivian has just introduced their truck. We're seeing those getting delivered to the very first owners, and that's exciting. But the F-150 has been one of the best-selling vehicles in the United States, at least for quite some time. And so we see a real shift to electric vehicles once those buyers can switch from an ICE F-150 over to an electric for around pretty close to the same pricing. So we're very excited to see that. So having said that, if you can go to the next slide, please. One thing that we're also seeing is an increasing divide between parts of the country in communities where there's real access to EV charging infrastructure. Plenty of, I wouldn't say plenty, but a pretty good network in some areas of level 2 and DC fast charging. And you can go across town to another part of a community, and there's basically no EV infrastructure whatsoever. So we're trying to work on that to decrease that divide. Next slide, please. So what I thought I would do is I work with Ira Dorfman in Washington, D.C. for DC Clean Cities. And we've had a lot of discussions with several players in the area who are, I should say, participants. who have a stake in transportation within the district. And we've talked about EV infrastructure by ward. So what I thought I would do, just to demonstrate kind of what we're up against, is take some of this information and show you the poverty rate by ward. So I pulled this information off of the Washington, D.C. There's a website that has this available and is updated regularly. And so you can see there's a pretty big shift in demographics from one side of the district to another. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So now what I've done is I've overlaid data from PlugShare, and you can see in this slide, you know, in the wards on the southern side of DC, just how few electric vehicle charging stations are available. And so that makes it especially difficult for people who call these areas home to adopt electric vehicles or even consider moving from an ICE car to an electric car. So our challenge has been, you know, how do we get more electric vehicle charging infrastructure into these areas? You know, what's the most intelligent way to spend these federal dollars that are flowing in? What's the most intelligent way for Blink as a company to spend our capital, you know, to put this infrastructure in as well? So we want to be good stewards of this money. We don't want to just put charging stations where there's already a pretty good concentration. We want to grow the network and bring in new drivers, and we see that as very important. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So you can see here, just for perspective, I've put in some electric vehicle registration data by state. And just another example, just show you where the District of Columbia lies, sort of compared with California and other parts of the nation, Washington State, Texas, where we're seeing really high adoption rates. So we're still, you know, lagging behind our partners out on the West Coast and EV adoption, but I do feel like that trend is going to change as time goes by. So if you could, next slide, please. So funding. So that comes down to breaking down some of the main resistance we see as an EVSE supplier toward putting in new EV charging stations. And that's for the host. It can be a daunting task to put in this EV charging infrastructure. It's really capital intensive. And then you have the equipment on top of the make ready expense. And I know earlier during the dealer discussion, there was some conversations around the investment the dealers are making. And that is substantial. Here at Blink, we're working with a number of dealers, and they are making real commitments to the future when they put in this infrastructure. So Blink is proud to be a member of the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership Program. So that combination of Department of Energy funding, capital that Blink is investing, is going toward putting EV charging infrastructure into areas that are underserved, that may not have the electric vehicle registrations that would typically support an EV charging network today, where a host could put their capital in and then expect to get a return by charging for the charging EV drivers do. So we feel like it's important to have this partnership with Virginia Clean Cities that extends into other states here in the Mid-Atlantic region. This is really a very crucial part to expanding into underserved communities, is having programs like the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Partnership. Next slide, please. And another very important part is community outreach. You know, we understand that it's important to not just look on a map and see, you know, where chargers are today and find gaps and just put chargers in those holes, especially in underserved communities. You know, I think, Alan, you mentioned today on a call earlier, during the last really big investment in infrastructure, when the highway system was built, there wasn't a lot of input from these communities, and large interstates cut communities in half, and it was really had a very negative impact on a lot of people. We don't want to repeat that with this new round of funding that the Biden administration has just made available to everyone. What we want to do is work with organizations very closely like Inaugural, who's going to be on the call later today, and find out from the community, listen to them, where would you like to see electric vehicle charging infrastructure? Get, education that Inaugural is so good at, helping people understand why electrification is important, the benefits of it, how can that benefit my community? How can it help me, even if I don't drive an EV? Can it help businesses in my area? Can it bring in people to those businesses where they spend money and help? Can it help me get to church every day? Can it help me get to work every day? I could buy a used Nissan Leaf with a very short range, very economically, and get to work or get to church back and forth much more quickly and efficiently than I could, let's say, on a bus or by train in some cases. Next slide, please. And education and equity. We're also working, like I said, with the Greater Washington Region and Clean Cities organization there to help identify areas like multifamily properties where we can put in charging infrastructure and help those folks who work for Uber and Lyft to charge their cars at night, or who just live in a multifamily apartment complex. If they don't have public access to charging, it's impossible for them to adopt an EV. So that's extremely important. Next slide, please. And I just want to basically go to the next slide. Go ahead. And just say right here, the statistics that we see, most of this charging is done residential, about 20% of it commercial, majority of it level 2, and a very small majority of it DC fast charging. So I just wanted to see this slide so you can see kind of where our focus is on helping people to charge in multifamily. It's extremely important to us. So I've gone a little bit over tonight. So I just want to thank everyone and appreciate the opportunity, Alan. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you, Andrew. Please stick around. I do want to jump right into Eric Wang with Fourth Mobility to chime in on multi-unit dwellings. And I do want to thank Fourth for the partnership in that project in the region as well. Eric?
Cool. Thank you very much. And Andrew, I must also say, please don't worry about eating into my time or anyone's time. I think you point out really good points, such as education is really, really important amongst all of these. So really happy to have you here. First, a little bit of self-introduction. My name is Eric Huang. I'm a program manager at Fourth, which is a nonprofit trade association focusing on advancing smart and advanced mobility. And our organization is based in Portland, or in the Pacific Northwest, where I am actually situated in Seattle, Washington. I'm very happy to be here for another wonderful chance to share a bit on EV charging at MUDs, which is a very important topic, not just because I work on a federal project that spent the past 2 years or so understanding what are the barriers and challenges at MUDs, but really comes down to the fact that MUD makes up approximately 34% of the whole nation's housing inventory in major metropolitan areas. And at the same time, it only accounts for about 5% or maybe less of all the home-based charging that takes place. And it is a very important thing to recognize the significant gap between how many people live in MUDs and how many people at MUDs actually have any kind of access to charging. So this is not really just a barrier to charging that simple. It's more of a barrier towards even EV adoption, because without home charging or without a place to charge, like Andrew mentioned, 80% of the charging takes place at home. Without charging, it will be really difficult for people to make that jump or make that decision. It's really like you would not really buy your iPhone knowing that you cannot charge your iPhone with the charge your iPhone at home or your MacBook at home. Similar case here. So really excited to be here to tell you more about the barriers that we have been able to identify, some lessons learned, and also just quickly go over some technology types that we have been able to look during this process. And this is a project that Center for Sustainable Energy, Fourth Energetics, and a lot of Clean City Coalition partners around the country that enable this to take place. So let's dig in. Next slide, please. So this one could go past really quick in 3 seconds, because setting the stage is really that EV are coming. A lot more of them are actually on the brink of taking over the majority of the market, and we really need to be prepared for this. And in order to be prepared for this, we really need to look at where are people charging. And as I mentioned previously, and also mentioned by Andrew, 80% of them takes place at home. And we have a significant portion of the home charging that's being missing right now, which is MUD or multi-unit dwellings. Next, please. So our project, which is coined to be VCI-MUD, Vehicle Charging Innovations at Multi-Unit Dwellings, is really trying to engage all the stakeholders across the country and try to understand what are the barriers. And then we have been demonstrating and understanding or studying some innovative technologies to address some of these barriers. And right now we're trying to compile the findings and put together a toolkit that hopefully will be rolled out early next year or mid next year for people to use, which is going to be an online toolkit with resources that will help stakeholders from residents of MUDs to building owners and also homeowner association boards to leverage so that they can actually start their journey on getting EV charging into their building. And hopefully next year we'll be able to start disseminating these informations. And of course, we'll definitely coordinate with Virginia Clean City Coalitions on this dissemination as well. So next slide. A little bit into the major challenges or barriers that we have seen as we go through the project. We have realized there are 5 major categories overall. Number 1, ownership and planning, which really ties down to the fact that homes or multi-unit buildings overall tend to be in 2 categories. One is apartment buildings, where there is a challenge of a landlord-tenant power dynamic that the landlords normally have, or I should say the property managers normally have a lot more power over the tenants in terms of what could happen. So installing EV charging could really comes down to a decision made by the building owner. Where homeowner associations or for condominiums overall, the unit owners don't always agree with each other. And it will be difficult, and it is a difficult and complicated process for them to reach a consensus in terms of how to set up their charging and who to pay for what and how much will they be charging each other down the road for. So that's first set of barrier, ownership and planning. Second set of barrier is really the site layout or the building itself, where examples would be parking lots or parking garages being really far from the power or from the electrical panel. And that will lead to really long conduits or really long wirings, which leads to extra cost. Or it could be that the building have very limited electrical capacity available at this point. And if they want to add charging capacity in the building, they would need to upgrade their services, which could be another extra cost towards the project, which were just a few examples pointing out here. And the third one is cost and cost recovery. Cost, I've already mentioned, the building site itself or how is the charging really set up could contribute towards a higher price tag towards the cost of the project, but also cost recovery is a big challenge. Because if you're sharing the projects, if you're sharing the charging stations, how are you going to set the pricing? Are you only going to cover the energy costs, or are you going to cover the cost of the infrastructure as well? There's a lot of discussion that needs to be had, and there is no clear-cut solution right now. And then if you are going for a dedicated solution or dedicated charging scenario for people, who is going to pay for what part of the infrastructure? All of those cost recovery questions are big barriers on this process. And then coming to the final 2, one is access control, which ties back to cost recovery to a certain extent, is who have access to this and how are we going to control and also track who's using what so that we can build them accordingly. And then finally is really energy and demand management. Comes down to if we're sharing chargers around multiple, sharing the capacity around multiple chargers, how are those being tracked? And all of these are individual types of challenges. And the one big challenge that we realize is the most important and most difficult to crack is really awareness and education. And that is why we have settled down to develop that toolkit. And hopefully it will be helpful to address or at least start the conversation. So moving on to the next slide, I'd like to quickly just go over 4 major type of technologies that we have looked into. And there's going to be a slide share with all of you to really dive into each of the case studies. I'm not going to dive into them because I have limited time, but the major 4 type of technology solutions that we have looked at are, number 1, shared charging stations, where It could be either a external control, which turns dumb charger into smart chargers and be able to track usage and also bill people accordingly. Or secondly, a reservation system that allows people to come in a orderly manner, so no one needs to rush anyone out and everybody knows their time to move their car. And then finally, is energy management, where it allows limited capacity at a building to serve multiple ports or more ports, or serve more cars overall in the same MUD building. The second type is for, or that is the second type of technology is for dedicated or individual units or resident units overall. Is number one, an adaptive load management system, where the system will be able to manage power outputs to each port dynamically according to factors like state of charge of the vehicle's battery, time of use rates, or demand responses coming from the grid. And then the other type of this kind of dedicated setup will be a rotational charging. So everybody stays plugged in, but there's going to be a system that just rotates that electrical capacity around multiple ports, so everybody gets some juice around the clock. And then the final two type that we have also looked into is mobile battery-based charging, which is essentially a large battery pack that could be run across the parking lot and be able to plug into vehicles at where they're parked, rather than having to move the cars when they're done charging. And then finally is an off-site solution for DC fast charging or level 2 level 2 charging that's not on the site of the MUD building, but rather somewhere else. So next slide, please. And I think we can probably move forward with 6 slides or 7, moving to the one about demonstration lessons learned. Here, quickly go over them, which I think are really interesting findings. Number one, we found out that most of the charging sections last or only produce or deliver about 10 to 20 kilowatt hour, regardless if it's a shared charging or dedicated charging or a public charging. That's when people actually charge, is that they need about 10 to 20 kilowatt hour of the power. And that is a fairly easy to meet threshold in terms of energy delivered, which is a very interesting finding. Secondly, we realized load management or power management systems can really benefit the system overall when it's at larger scale, meaning that when we have more cars or more ports deployed, this kind of load management system can really help in scaling the availability, but also allowing a better economic or financial benefits to be had as well. Thirdly, offsite charging could be a pretty good interim solution right now, but public charging could be more costly because they are simply more expensive compared to residential rates that you might be paying, sometimes 2 to 3 times more expensive. And then the third lessons learned is that the fourth learning is that decision-making process can be really complicated at MUDs. As I have mentioned, there is both apartment building route and then also the homeowner association condominium route. And either route really have their own set of challenges, and it really needs that common ground of understanding and awareness and education to allow the stakeholders to have that good conversation or meaningful, informed conversation. And then finally, allocation of cost is a really important consideration, and sometimes it's also the largest hiccup or the largest barrier for any substantial process to be made in this kind of project as well, because everybody cannot agree on how to pay for things, and it would just be almost infinitely stalled. So next slide. Finally, EV charging and MUDs and equity is a very interesting topic. I would love to broaden this out if possible, but quickly go over them. Is that access to home charging is crucial. It's crucial for equity in EV transportation or in electric transportation, because those who have been able to have the means to charge their cars and buy electric vehicles are those who have dedicated home charging or garage or at a single family homes. And having access to charging at MUD is going to broaden the access to EV to so many more people. And that is one of the biggest reasons why access to charging almost equals to access to actually being able to drive an EV in the most optimal way. And that is why we should focus on this as much as possible. Understand I have very limited time here, so I'm really going to just wrap this up right now by telling you that there is going to, for the next slide, we have a lot of resources that we'll be able to provide to you when the toolkit comes online. And here are just some examples of those. So please keep your eyes open for these kind of resources. And I believe Virginia Clean City Coalition is going to have those broadcast it to you once we have those available. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and glad to be here.
Eric, we are lucky to have you here, and I do appreciate getting through a rich amount of content, and hopefully we can come back through this as the toolkit gets deployed. But also stick around because we've got some extra time we can make up during the Q&A sessions if there's a little bit more or some afterthoughts that you'd be willing to share with us, Eric. So please stick with us. I actually am very excited about I'm excited about all of our speakers, but especially excited that Danielle Cherry Hoover with EV Noir is here with us. Danielle is in the middle of her e-mobility, diversity, equity, and inclusion conference, and I can't believe that she would run a hard day today and then come around and do that tomorrow and be spending her evening with us as well in this important subject. And EV Noir is the lead in the regional Mid-Atlantic Electric Vehicle Partnerships education components, and so which is one of only 3 nationwide projects on electric vehicle ecosystems from the federal government. So I do want to recognize the great leadership of Danielle, and also just how lucky we are as a Commonwealth and as a region to have here with us today. Danielle?
Oh gosh, after that wonderful introduction, I'm good. Thank you. And there's no better place I would rather be tonight. What I'm going to do in the essence of time as well is drop a bunch of links in the chat, and we can go ahead and get going. So next slide. I first want to thank everyone for the opportunity of being here, and I also want to thank Forth. They're actually partnering with the conference, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I posted the chat because we do have Alan speaking tomorrow. So thank you, Alan, and all the partners within this project. So what I'm going to do is just briefly talk about the Mid-Atlantic Electrification Project because of the impact and the opportunities within many of you who are listening's home state of Virginia. And thankfully for me, there are a ton of partners already on this line who gave some wonderful feedback that I don't even have to talk about. So thank you for those who've done, including Eric and Andrew over at Blink. So the Mid-Atlantic Electrification, EV Noir is the education and outreach lead for this portion, and again, it encompasses states and areas that you see on the screen. And the opportunity and the wonderful opportunity that we have to work in the education and outreach space is basically engaging diverse communities of stakeholders, acknowledging both past injustices, which needs to be said and done, and identify and address gaps in transportation and mobility while exploring economic, workforce, and development opportunities. So again, next slide. Very happy to partner with not only folks like Blink, Forth on other things, but in this project in particular, BGE, DMME, the Clean Cities coalitions across the various areas, but most importantly, within our leads at Virginia Clean Cities. So within this slide, just briefly talk about EV Noir, mission and vision that you see here. Basically, EV Noir envisions a world where easily accessible electric vehicles can empower communities of color, both rural and urban communities and low-income communities, basically to rid their neighborhoods of toxic air pollution. That was a theme that I've heard with others speaking, in addition to grow the economies, and just address climate changes. So living an EV life, not only, or having e-mobility, has tremendous benefits. Next slide. So our sister organization, EV Hybrid Noir, it's a 501c3 arm, and it's basically a coalition of about 17 states, actually maybe a little more now, and some international areas, and there's about 3,000 plus members within those chapters. So those are the statewide chapters that you see on the screen. Next slide, please. And EV Noir and EV Hybrid Noir has compiled extensive data on the attitudes, beliefs, and knowledges of the EV life that we talked about, electric, hybrid, and autonomous vehicles, as well as highlighting the financial and public health benefits, as I mentioned before, driving next generation and zero emissions. So some focus areas are climate justice, policy, EV adoption, workforce, economic development, and public health, education, and engagement. So what does an EV driver look like? Anyone that you can pass on the street. We all talked about that. There's no one set person who is an EV driver. Next slide. Don't even need to go into this. I think I'm preaching to the choir. What's going on in the e-mobility space and climate space? As of this week, most recently, things got cited. There are a lot of been signatures on paper, excuse me. So I don't want to overstate the obvious. Some of the headlines that you see there. These are some of the reasons why the conversation around transportation and clean transportation is so important, especially from the public health standpoint. I don't know about you, but I don't want to wait until 2040 to breathe a little easier. Next slide. So what I want to do is talk about the why. Those are some other headlines that you can see within the BIPOC space, especially. And for those who are listening, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I would be remiss to say that this month is Indigenous Peoples Month. So I definitely want to just pay honor and homage to that, especially those Native peoples getting their just due. You can, next slide, please. So briefly, some of the, hopefully it's not too grainy, but I'll talk through some of what many of you already know. Some of this information is from World Health Organization. So annually, air pollutants aggravate the, air pollution and illnesses aggravated by air pollution kills about 7 million people. And some of those are byproducts of air pollution. For example, pneumonia, stroke, heart attacks, cancer, chronic obstruction, pulmonary disease. I am no health expert, but our co-founder, Dr. Shelley Francis, is. She has a doctorate in public health, and this is something near and dear to her heart. And that's another reason why we want to speak to it, because all of what I just said negatively affects the BIPOC communities in particular. You can go ahead to the next slide. So this is another slide just talking to the point where those CO2 emissions affect air quality. I think it was Charles who talked about building community earlier on. That is so important so that we know what's going on. And I think it was Andrew mentioned too about areas within transportation and zoning and districting, et cetera. For example, where there may be zoning in areas of low income or moderate income families, which are predominantly within those frontline communities. So the air quality is just terrible and it leads to other issues. So not only does having messaging and listening and talking to stakeholders is important, but we all have the right to breathe clean air. For every $1 spent to reduce vehicle emissions, that contributes to $9 of benefits in public health. So no one has to go back and forth to the doctor, something that simple. Next slide. So now let's talk about briefly the who. So we've engaged with a number of communities through various initiatives, and with engaging with diverse communities, it is a win-win situation. When talking with frontline communities, it's important to talk to the people who should be at the front of the line. There's a very big difference between equity and equality. So if I give somebody $100, that $100 is immediate from one hand to another, for example. Or if I pay somebody in pennies to add up to $100, it takes a little longer. So any project should be executed not only for the community, again, I'm piggybacking off of what Charles mentioned, but with the community as partners, listening to the people who need to be served. Go ahead and next slide, please. And how do we do that? Within the Mid-Atlantic Electrification project in particular, we speak to K through 12 and working with our partners, for example, historically Black colleges and universities and K through 12. We did both by partnering with Morgan State University, which is an HBCU, just this past July, and they are located in Baltimore, Maryland. And their National Summer Transportation Institute had students from middle school and high school. And it helps with that pipeline of communication of talking with and educating and just giving resources about an EV life. Even something as simple as, should my first car be an EV? The affordability is there. They can work at the local fast food chain and still afford their vehicle, and also help the health benefits within their area. And then that also piggybacks off of the education and then the implementation. So working with partners like Blink, hey, we have all of this data. We're talking to stakeholders and focus groups such as children within the learning labs. Where are they going to even just charge their car if they live in a multi-dwelling unit and there's no charging infrastructure? So I'm very proud to be working with Inaugural and within the project in particular, Mid-Atlantic project, because we can bridge that gap more quickly. Next slide. So message does matter. Talking to not only the who, the correct who, but thought leaders, trusted sources, folks like yourself who are on this line, who are thought leaders, interrupters, and distributors of information. So it doesn't have to be super technical, but the conversation does need to start. So what I'm going to do is also continue to put some information in the chat. One, it is a toolkit that with a public policy toolkit. I'm going to drop that in right now. Next slide. And also, I just previously dropped in the diversity conference, because there's over 90 different thought leaders and panelists. It started off today. It is a 2-day conference. Conversations can be furthered, such as this. There's networking opportunities, partnerships. I'm a big believer in relationships. And thankfully, the people we have worked with, especially with Mid-Atlantic Project, have been amazing. So I just want to say thank you. You all literally and figuratively have been a breath of fresh air. This is my first time talking with, especially you all within Virginia Clean Cities, your staff, Alan, everybody's been spot on. And then our one and only event face-to-face in West Virginia, working with Blink, and Andrew's been helpful when we did our whistle stop tour in West Virginia. Next slide. So you may see a familiar face in one of those bubbles at the bottom. If you all are available, it is free to nonprofits and individuals to sign up. There's still room, obviously. There about it's 1,000, a little over 1,000 registrants. So happy to listen in to Alan tomorrow. And next slide. Also want to just throw this out there because it's within your area as a resource. Dominion folks, there is a SKIP program. And I know I'm speaking very fast. I'll put it in the chat, and there the link is at the bottom. I wanted to bring that up because there are rebates out there. As people are working back or coming back to the workforce, companies need to be proactive. Having a plan in place before something happens, I think this is something that the pandemic has taught a lot of us about, even in my personal life. So I wanted to just throw this slide in here because it's specific to your area. So Dominion Energy, you can see there the incentives of rebate charging systems for workplace charging. So I'm happy to follow up with anyone else about any other questions. And one other thing that I wanted to put in the chat too, I will in a second, is the Drive the Future and other opportunities with HBCUs in college. So once you get on that escalator from K through 12 to college and then workplace and also community, we're touching all of those segments within our Mid-Atlantic Electrification Project, or will be over the next couple of years within the project. as well as others, because talking to people where they are and who they are absolutely matter within diverse communities. So with that, I say thank you.
And if anybody's catching up on this in a recording, these links will be on the Virginia Clean Cities event page. So you may just have to Google for that if you're looking at this on YouTube or something. Hey, or we'll put it in the YouTube comments too. Hey, so we do have one question for the team. And Eric, I might put you on the spot even to check in about legislative solutions that might be at the national, but also at the state level to streamline the decision process for installing charging at multi-unit dwellings. Wondering if there is more that needs to be done. And in addition to legislative solutions, I know you have some other frameworks such as voluntary dialogue. You know, just talking to your neighbors, that's tough, and especially in a like this. So, Eric, I put you on the spot to ask about legislative solutions for streamlining the decision process for multi-unit dwelling chargers.
Yeah, sure thing. Not feeling on the spot at all. It's actually a good question that we have gotten asked a lot before. So right to charge law or legislations have not been a stranger to us. Overall, we have seen it on the West Coast in state of Oregon and California as well. However, right to charge does not necessarily guarantee someone that actually have the equitable access to really, or actually be empowered to install their charging stations, because a lot of the times the language really just requires, say, the landlord to reach an cannot prohibit them from doing so. They just need to reach an agreement. But who is actually going to pay for what, and what happens after, say, the tenants pay a massive amount of couple $1,000s to install that charging station? What if they leave? What's going to happen? None of those are really prescribed, and it is really difficult for anyone to actually reach an agreement on those. So yes, it's great to have right to charge laws where, for those who have the resources and capability, will be able to go about and do it because they're empowered to do so. But for those who might lack the means to actually even spend the money to put in a level 1 or 110 house outlet, because it's not cheap either. It could be expensive. It requires a lot of wiring that goes to the power. That has been the situation thus far. Answering the question of what could be done in this to streamline this a little bit better, I think the process is still a little bit ambiguous right now, because every building kind of have their own process, and it's really your own role to create what kind of rules there might be. But I would really focus more on how to create more incentives and more conducive environment to really allow people to consider this and really think about what fits for them the best, instead of prescribing them with one way or another. Sometimes financial incentives or just the carrot could be a really good way to prompt people to think about this and really be even creative about how to go about this. Therefore, I would say I'll focus more on creating more incentives around this so that people get interested and they start to have that conversation. And of course, everybody starting from a level ground of good and reliable information would also be really important. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to keep us moving along into the utility landscape. And I do want to recognize our first utility speaker, Joyce Bodo, Director of Clean Energy at Rappahannock Electric Cooperative and a board member with Virginia Clean City. Joyce?
Thanks, Alan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So good evening. Thanks, everyone, for hanging with us tonight. My name is Joyce. I'm the Director of Energy Solutions and Clean Energy at Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. So the areas that I help oversee include electric transportation, but it also includes solar and net metering, energy efficiency, demand response, and just technology solutions. Next slide, please. So Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, we are a not-for-profit co-op that spans 22 counties across Virginia. We serve, on average, about 10 meters per mile, which is pretty typical for a cooperative. And we have about 430 employees. And we have been so busy in the electric transportation space recently. And so I'm just going to share some of the things that we are doing and then plans for the future. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I'm super excited about is that an upcoming residential program, which is an EV credit, once it is approved by the State Corporation Commission, which should be any minute now, if you are an REC member and you have an all-electric car or a plug-in hybrid, it doesn't matter if you are charging on a level 1 120 or level 2 240, you may be eligible to participate. All we are asking is that members schedule their car to charge during what we're calling smart hours. So during the day from 10 to 2 p.m. or overnight from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., members will send us a picture proving that they have scheduled their car. Once we enroll them, then that member will receive a $7 bill credit each month, which is essentially 200 miles of free charging, or $84 a year. It is pending before the commission right now, but I'm hoping that it will be approved any minute. And that is a pilot program in the year 1, 200 members can sign up, and then in year 2, 400 members can sign up. So next slide, please. And then from a company perspective, we are also really promoting electric vehicles. Many members of our upper management have electric cars as their personal vehicles. And we've also just launched workplace charging. So for employees that work out of our Fredericksburg headquarters office, they have access to free workplace charging. And you may wonder, well, why would you give someone free electric vehicle charging? And I think the same concept goes for coffee. Is we buy coffee for all employees. Maybe not everyone likes the co-op coffee, or maybe they don't drink co-op coffee, but it's still a benefit as an employee. And this is actually through the Dominion Workplace Rebate Program, which was just mentioned earlier. And the chargers that we selected are ChargePoint. And so essentially what I do is I go in the ChargePoint portal and I add drivers who are REC employees to the portal. And so it is very cool, and it just launched, it just got activated a couple weeks ago. So we are really excited about that. Next slide, please. And then from a member perspective, we have lots and lots of online resources. And as the day goes by, we even add more tools. So one of the tools that we have is a calculator in which a prospective EV owner can compare gasoline prices versus their new fuel, electricity, which is powered by REC. So in this example, I have put in my personal Toyota Sienna minivan. If I drove an hour to work every day, and this example, it's 7 days a week, I would spend $547 on gasoline at today's prices of $3.30. If I traded that van in and I got a new 2022 Bolt EUV, which is more like an SUV, I would spend $124 a month in electricity prices. This is a huge savings. And next slide, please. And then another tool that we have on our website is an EV dealer tool, in which someone can go on our website and say, you know, I really want to buy a Tesla, for instance. And this map will show them where in Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland there are Tesla dealers. And that's just one example, but you can enter in by zip code, you could enter in by make and model. I've already been emailing with the previous speaker from tonight, and I'm asking her, are your dealers on our map? And so we're already connecting so that we can keep this information up to date. It's a static map. It's not a map that shows what cars are on the lot right this second, but it's dealers that have historically had EVs on their lot and they know how to sell them. So next slide, please. And then we have a lot going on now, but then looking ahead, electric transportation can be complicated, and there's a lot of ways to navigate. So in order to be proactive, we are looking at and basically having a strategic plan for electric transportation, because we want REC to be our energy expert for our members. We want to drive EV adoption, and we also want to model what does EV adoption have on the distribution system. From a utility perspective, EV charging can be great if it's planned for appropriately. If you have a subdivision and you have 5 people in the same cul-de-sac and they all buy a level 2 charger, that can be detrimental to the grid. It can overload transformers. So all of those items are things that we're thinking about from a utility perspective. We think about them because we don't want our members to think about reliability, but we think about it 24/7. So this is something that we're actively engaging in now, doing that study. And then also we're looking at our territory. Our territory is very unique. We have a lot of rural drivers. That's one thing that I want to promote more, is telling rural drivers, yes, electric vehicles are here. Yes, you can really get to work and back in your car. We have the impact of a lot of major interstates. Our territory is surrounded by 4 major interstates, and so a lot of our members are commuting on those interstates, and those are the places where future EV installations are going to happen. We need to be ready for that. And then those who have longer commute times. Currently, my commute time is walking up the stairs into my office, but for other people, they're still driving an hour or 2 just to get to work one way. Next slide, please. And then in the future, really the strategic planning around electric transportation, we will be taking a hard look and having specific programs around incentives. How can we better incentivize electric transportation, not just at the residential level? How can we educate our members even more? Our website now is great for prospective buyers, but what about somebody that already has a car? What if they're looking at how does a second car impact their electric bill? Those types of things. And then improving access to rural and disadvantaged areas. I know we've heard a lot about that tonight. And we're also increasing the number of electric vehicles within our fleet. So we have 2 Chevy Bolts within our fleet, but we have plans to add more electric vehicles as time goes on. And I think someone said earlier that if someone sees electric vehicles in their workplace, they're more likely to transfer that and their home and say, hey, I saw this at work. This is pretty cool. These are all things that are happening. So it's an exciting time to be here. And I thank you for your time tonight. The next slide has my contact information in case anybody has questions.
I'm very excited about that utility filing and the support you have for your customers to improve the air in their communities. And I think we can all agree that rural drivers can be disadvantaged drivers as well with those longer trips. I do want to slide us right into our next speaker, Kate Staples, Director of Electrification at Dominion Energy, and also a board member of Virginia Clean Cities. We're sort of hitting a twofer here. Kate.
Hi, everyone. I have very exciting news. I only have 2 slides. And I think that is mostly because a lot of the speakers ahead of me covered a lot of things that I would talk about. So, you know, I think it's really great that we have organizations like this. And, you know, it's almost great to back clean up because we're all moving in the same direction and advocating for the same things. So I feel like I'm with family, but I will talk a little bit about what Dominion Energy Virginia is doing. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this slide gives a quick overview with some graphics, a little more interesting than just, didn't want to put just a bunch of words on a slide, on what we're doing with transportation electrification. So we can't ask our customers to electrify their fleets or buy EVs if we're not doing it ourselves. So we have a pretty ambitious fleet electrification goal where we're looking to electrify our 75% of our passenger fleet by 2030, and 50% of our medium and heavy duty fleet to EV or to alternative fuels by 2030. And then after 2030, everything we'll purchase will be electric or alternative fuel. So if we can get some cars on the lots, get some chips and stuff going, I think that'll really help us move in the right direction. But one of the best things about having a goal like that is we get to learn all of the things that our customers are going to ask us about. So they're going to ask us about makes and models. They're going to ask us how to charge. When you drive an electric car, when you put it in park, you hit a button instead of shifting your gear. It's super cool and it's super easy. But you know, we know those things and we can answer questions for our customers. So we want to walk the walk, but it's also a great you know, education resource for our employees. And skipping to education, Joyce showed a really awesome tool that a lot of us have on our website. She did a really great demo of it. So we have a tool like that for customers, but we're starting to think about more specific one-on-one types of education. So, it's really important to get education out there on the benefits of electric vehicles, how they work, how you charge them, help reduce some of those barriers and some of those anxieties that folks have to adoption. But we're starting to get more specific questions. We're getting questions from condo associations. Can you come out and talk to my HOA in my community? We're getting questions from fleets. Can we come see Dominion's fleet and learn about some of your lessons learned? So we're trying to do some more. We're trying to move from just education. We're trying to move to outreach too. We're hosting a pretty big ride and drive event this weekend. It's full, so we're super excited about that. And we're hoping to do some more of those as well. So we're hoping to get over 2 days, about 300 people, behind the wheel of an electric car. Somebody put in the chat, feel that torque, something about the torque. Once you drive an EV, you're hooked. They're so fun to drive. And I think that folks don't know that. So I think it'll be cool to see folks get behind an EV for the first time. So moving to the right, smart charging infrastructure. I got some awesome shout outs on this call. I got some edible arrangements I need to send to people. We do have a smart charging pilot right now for non-residential customers where we provide rebates for charging infrastructure that is networked. We call it smart. So that means that we can help customers control it so that they have just a better handle on their energy use, and so that we can encourage them to charge at times where there's less strain on the grid, which is good for all customers, not even just EV drivers. And so that program is non-residential, but we do have a residential program too. So we have a rebate program for residential that also encourages the use of smart charging. Moving down to the bottom, grid transformation. Joyce mentioned how, we don't want our customers to have to worry about reliability. And, we hear a lot that customers will call us and say, I want to put in charging stations, but, I don't think I have capacity, or I don't think my electric panel can handle it. Those are solutions that we can work with customers on. And it's been going really well. But I think as we get into these big decarbonization projects, so big fleets, airports, ports, transit electrification, things like that, we're really going to need to ready our grid. And so we're certainly committed to being ahead of that and making the grid, smarter and stronger and absolutely ready for electric transportation. We certainly don't want that to be a barrier. We want that to help encourage adoption. I can talk all day about some of the stuff that we're doing with the grid, but because I only have 2 slides and I'm standing between you guys and maybe dinner, I'll hold off on all my grid goodies. Alan, do I need to hurry up?
No, you're good. I didn't know if you were cutting out.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so for electric school buses, Dominion has the nation's largest electric school bus program. So we helped 15 different school districts get their buses on the road. So we have 50 electric school buses on the roads in Virginia, which is awesome because they are already providing air quality benefits, carbon reduction, and operational savings to those school districts. So we're super excited about that program. And these school buses, the batteries and the chargers are bi-directional. So they are capable of, when they're not transporting students, they can push energy back onto the grid. So they can help us with resiliency and using more renewables. So we can, provide benefits to the grid for all customers. So we're looking at options to expand that program too. And lastly, but certainly not least, innovation. I started in this role, started working on electric vehicles. I drove my first EV for Dominion, I think 7 years ago. And it was a Nissan Leaf. I think it had about 70 miles of range. I don't think I could even tell you what a public charger looked like. And now we're doing pilot programs with autonomous shuttles. So the industry is changing a lot. It's such a fun time to be here. So we do have an autonomous shuttle right now, a partnership with Fairfax. So if you go to the Dunloring Metro Station, it's in the Mosaic District in Fairfax, you can ride Relay for free. It operates daily in the middle of the day. We do have a safety steward on board just to make folks more comfortable, but Relay is equipped with cameras and intelligence so that it can effectively be an autonomous shuttle. And we think that there's areas, certainly trying to change out ICE vehicles to electric vehicles is better for air quality, but I think it's better for everybody in certain cases if we can just get vehicles off the road. So we think that autonomous transportation could be a good solution for that. Next and final slide. So what's next? What we're working on right now is, a couple years ago, the number one question I got from customers is, how do I charge an EV? And now the number one question I'm getting from customers is, how do I electrify my fleet? So we're all in on fleet electrification. We are trying to provide, advisory services and consulting, and very intensive solutions to fleets, because we know that that's a much bigger decision. And sometimes it's more of a financial decision than an emotional decision on swapping out your fleet versus switching to an EV with your personal vehicle. So we're all in on fleets. The middle box, turnkey solutions for customers. Another really common question that I get, especially from apartment communities and condo associations, is, can you just come put an EV charger in for me? And right now, Dominion can't. We aren't allowed to do that. But we do have some proposals, some program proposals out there in front of our regulators to be able to do that for customers. It would certainly be optional, and we'd have to work with a lot of the folks on this call to do it. We don't manufacture charging stations. We certainly don't. We can't spell Silicon Valley, so we don't have a charging network. And I'm not an electrician, so we want to offer these turnkey solutions to customers. We want to be the one-call solution, and we want to partner with our partners to do that. And lastly, stimulus funding. We want to do everything we can to get every dollar of stimulus funding to Virginia possible, and to use it to get metal in the ground. So we really want to help our customers turn that stimulus funding into something that's real in Virginia, so that we can start getting more benefits of transportation electrification today and not in next year, not 2030, not 2050, because the EVs are coming and we want to help them come faster. So I think that's all I have, other than the next slide has our website on it. And that's our team email address. So if you ever have any questions, you can contact our team. I would give you my email address, but I might not be as fast to respond as my team. So I do get that email too, though. So I encourage you to check out our site. It's got lots of information about our rebate programs, our education resources, our time of use rates, and where to find charging stations. So I'm super excited for this group. I've been on the board with Plug-in and C for a few years, and I'm just super excited to see us taking off in Virginia too. So thanks for having me, Alan.
Well, we're lucky to have you, and I'm going to combine two of the questions that came in from attendees, and this might sound a little bit long, but it's basically asking about other size vehicles. And Kate, please don't hold back. I also saw people talk about their love of grid goodies. So aside from grid readiness and bi-directional mentioned, what are some special needs that utilities are seeing specific to medium and heavy duty fleet sector? And also, when do you see that developing, those vehicles or that market? And then what about methods to reduce the lead times to get that heavy duty charging out there? And then the second question is similar. It's sort of looking at a range of vehicles beyond individually owned vehicles: transit, car sharing, micro mobility, school buses, etc., and how some of those larger and smaller vehicles can be connected with underserved, overburdened, environmental justice, and rural communities. And so I'd hope I can hear from both of you guys about these bigger vehicles and their charging, but then also that whole spectrum of vehicles and underserved people.
Yeah, Joyce, do you have a preference on which question, or if you want to go first, we can divide and conquer?
Yeah, let's divide and conquer. Between the two of us, we should be able to answer it. I will say the lead time question, I'm sure Kate has the same perspective as far as supply chain affects everyone, even utilities. So we are having a hard time even, getting things that would normally be kind of quick. So that means that if someone is planning a fleet electrification project, or they're going to be buying school buses, or they want to have employer charging available, they should be telling us as soon as they're thinking about doing it, because it takes us longer to get the upgrades done than it would in a non-COVID time.
Yep, absolutely. If you think about it, I've heard a couple things even during non-COVID where if you order a transit bus, an electric transit bus, it could take a year to 18 months to get it. Well, if we have to get a 2 MVA transformer from Europe, it could take us 6 months to get that. So if we can be doing those timelines in parallel, we can make sure that when your bus is delivered, you can plug it in and charge it. It doesn't have to sit on your lot. And then, about the other vehicle types, I really like that the conference that Danielle was talking about, the EV Nor conference, is e-mobility, because I think we think too much about, we think about transportation and we think about vehicles, but really it's a mobility shift. So it can be cars off the road. It can be encouraging more bike transportation. And we're using electric solutions for that last mile. So, we actually are going to launch a rideshare initiative to help try to electrify rideshare. So for folks who choose not to own cars, to have electric solutions for them. And because, rideshare operates in every neighborhood, transit operates in every neighborhood, school buses operate in every neighborhood. So even if you don't ever get in a car again the rest of your life, you decide you're just going to walk everywhere the rest of your life, you would benefit from electrification of that transportation, from an air quality and carbon benefit for those vehicles as well. So I think I can't see the questions. I'm sorry, I don't have it up. But so whoever asked that question, I'm glad that we're starting to shift from thinking just passenger vehicles, because this really, if we want to decarbonize transportation, it's a full e-mobility shift.
And that question was David Gelman asking about the e-mobility shift and the variety and micro mobility. So thank you, David. Also a board member. And I'm looking to see if there are any additional questions. And at this point, if folks want to start waving their hands around or dropping it in the chat, we're sort of winding things down. And so also if folks have questions for any of the previous speakers. But I do want to thank everybody for being here today and for participating. And so I do see just a few notes about transformers and other grid items, and also David did ask a question about what are utilities seeing in specific to the sector and smoothing the path, and I think that was addressed. So thank you, Dave, for dropping that question in. John, I'll pass it back to you if you want to close us out, or if there's anything else that I've missed. But thank you all for your time today. We do have questions. Bruce and John are tackling this. But John, anything else?
Nope, nothing else. I just want to say thank you again to all the speakers for coming out, and all the attendees for coming. I think this was a super enlightening and informative event. And again, this was recorded, so it's going to be up on the Virginia Clean Cities website, and you'll be able to, we'll divide it into chapters, and you'll be able to view which portion you want to review again. If you have any questions about the event or anything in general, feel free to email me or Bruce Vilk with the Virginia Clean Cities team. And yeah, we'll get back to you.